I found my mother standing in the kitchen at 3 in the morning, fully dressed in her Sunday best, clutching her purse, and demanding to know why I'd hidden her car keys from her again. "Mama, it's Thursday night," I said gently, my bare feet cold against the linoleum. "There's nowhere you need to go right now." "Don't you dare lie to me, Patricia Ann." Her voice carried that sharp edge I'd been hearing more and more lately. "I have a meeting with the bank president at 9 o'clock sharp. Daddy's counting on me to handle the farm loan." My heart clenched. Daddy had been gone for 12 years, and we'd sold the farm 6 months after his funeral. But in Mama's mind, trapped somewhere in 1987, these obligations were as real as the floral wallpaper she'd insisted on keeping in this kitchen for the past 30 years. "Let me make you some warm milk," I offered, reaching for her elbow. "We can talk about the meeting in the morning." She jerked away from me, her eyes flashing with an anger I rarely saw, except during these midnight episodes. "You think I'm losing my mind, don't you? Just like your sister keeps saying. Well, I'm not crazy, and I'm not staying locked up in this house like some kind of prisoner." The word prisoner hit me like a slap. Was that how she saw our life together now? These 4 walls of the little ranch house where I'd moved in 8 months ago, leaving behind my own condo and my careful routines to become her full-time caregiver. "Mama, nobody thinks you're crazy." I said, though, even as the words left my mouth, I could hear yesterday's phone conversation with my sister Karen echoing in my memory. "She's getting worse, Patty. You can't keep pretending this is just normal aging. Mrs. Henderson saw her trying to get into the Petersons' car last week, thinking it was hers. And what about when she called 911 because she thought someone was breaking in, but it was just you coming home from the grocery store?" I defended Mama then, just like I was defending her now, even to herself. But standing in this kitchen with her clutching that worn leather purse like a lifeline to a world that no longer existed, I felt something crack inside my chest. "Come on," I said, gentling my voice. "Let's sit on the porch for a few minutes. The night air might help." To my surprise, she followed me outside without argument. The October air carried the scent of dying leaves and the faint wood smoke from someone's fireplace 3 streets over. Mama settled into the old porch swing Daddy had hung 40 years ago, and for a moment, in the soft yellow glow from the street lamp, she looked almost like herself again. "I dreamed about him," she said quietly. "Your daddy. He was standing by the kitchen window and he looked so worried about something. He kept saying, 'Tell Patty she doesn't have to carry it all alone.'" My throat tightened. "What do you think he meant?" I don't know, baby. I just don't know anymore." She reached for my hand, her fingers thin and cool. "Sometimes I feel like I'm floating away from myself and I can't find my way back." It was the most lucid she'd been in weeks, and I wanted to hold on to this moment, bottle it up, and save it for the hard days that seemed to multiply like weeds in an untended garden. But even as we sat there in the peaceful darkness, I could feel my phone buzzing in my pocket with what I already knew would be another text from Karen. "Called 3 times tonight. Mom, okay, need to talk tomorrow about the facility in Millfield." The facility. Karen had been pushing for it since summer, armed with brochures and statistics about professional care and quality of life. She lived 4 hours away in Atlanta with her executive husband and her teenage kids flying in once a month with her designer handbags and her gentle but relentless pressure to do what's best for everyone. "I should probably get you back to bed." I told Mama, though part of me wanted to sit on this porch until dawn, pretending that morning wouldn't bring another day of medications and confusion and the slowly tightening noose of impossible decisions. The next morning arrived with the shrill sound of the doorbell at 7:30. I opened it to find Mrs. Kowalski from next door still in her robe and slippers holding a manila envelope. "Patricia, I'm so sorry to bother you this early, but we need to talk." Something in her tone made my stomach drop. Mrs. Kowalski had been our neighbour for 15 years, bringing over casseroles when Daddy died and never complaining when Mama's sprinkler system occasionally soaked her prize-winning begonias. "Of course, come in, I'll put some coffee on. Actually, this might be better handled outside." She glanced toward the living room, where I could hear Mama humming and talking to herself, a routine that had become as predictable as sunrise. It's about the Homeowners Association, the HOA. I'd been getting their newsletters for years, but had never paid much attention to the increasingly petty rules about mailbox colours and hedge heights. Our little subdivision had always been the kind of place where neighbours borrowed cups of sugar and watched each other's pets without formal committees and violation notices. Someone filed a complaint. Mrs. Kowalski continued opening the envelope. Multiple complaints, actually, about noise disturbances, property maintenance, and, she paused, looking genuinely pained, wellness checks. Wellness checks? Patricia, you know I would never. I mean, we've been friends for years. But apparently your mother has been walking around the neighborhood at odd hours, knocking on doors asking about people who moved away decades ago. The Hendersons found her in their backyard last Tuesday trying to hang laundry on their clothesline. I felt heat rising in my cheeks. She gets confused sometimes, but she's not dangerous. Of course not, but the association is saying it's become a safety issue for her and for the other residents. Mrs. Kowalski handed me the envelope. They're requiring a formal response within 30 days about your plans for addressing the situation. The phrase addressing the situation felt like code for something much harsher. I thought about Karen's texts about the brochures for Millfield Manor that had been sitting on my kitchen counter for 3 weeks, about the slow erosion of the life I'd thought I was building when I moved in here. Thank you for bringing this to me personally, I said. I appreciate that. Mrs. Kowalski nodded, then hesitated. For what it's worth, Patricia, I think what you're doing is beautiful. Not many daughters would sacrifice their own lives the way you have, but maybe there are other ways to take care of her without wearing yourself down to nothing. After she left, I sat at the kitchen table reading the formal language of the complaint. 3 incidents in the past month. Property maintenance issues, the front flower bed that I'd let go to weeds because I couldn't seem to find time between doctor's appointments and medication schedules, and the constant vigilance required to keep Mama safe. Noise disturbances, probably her late-night conversations with Daddy, or her tendency to turn the television volume up to levels that could wake the dead. What's that, sweetheart? Mama appeared in the doorway fully dressed again in clothes that didn't quite match, but at least they were weather-appropriate this time. Just some mail, Mama, nothing important. Is it bills I can help with those? I was always good with the household accounts. The offer broke my heart because it was true. Before the disease started stealing pieces of her mind, Mama had balanced the family books to the penny, managed the farm's finances through good years and lean ones, and taught me everything I knew about making a dollar stretch. I've got it handled. I said, though, handled felt like a generous description of my current financial situation. Taking care of Mama full-time meant I'd had to leave my job at the county clerk's office. And while her social security and the small pension from Daddy's job at the grain elevator covered her medications and basic expenses, it didn't leave much room for things like lawn care or house maintenance or my own rapidly dwindling savings account. My phone rang, Karen's name flashing on the screen like a persistent headache. Morning, sis. How's our girl doing today? She's fine, Karen. We're both fine. That's good to hear. Listen, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I really think we need to move forward with visiting that facility. I could drive up this weekend, maybe take Mom for a tour. They have a lovely activity room, and the staff seems... Karen, we've been through this. I know, but Patty, you sound exhausted. When's the last time you had a full night's sleep or went anywhere that wasn't the doctor's office or the pharmacy? The truth was I couldn't remember. The days had blurred together into an endless cycle of meals and medications, and moments of crisis, followed by brief interludes of peace. But the idea of surrendering Mama to the care of strangers, no matter how professional or well-meaning, felt like admitting defeat. She needs familiar surroundings, I said. She needs people who love her. She needs professional care, Patty, and you need your life back. This is my life now. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if we'd been disconnected. Then Karen sighed, a sound I'd been hearing more and more lately in our conversations. I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to really think about your answer. If the situation were reversed, if you were the one with dementia and Mum was 52 years old and giving up everything to take care of you, what would you want her to do? The question hit me like a physical blow because I knew the answer immediately. I would want her to live her life. I would want her to visit me and love me, but not sacrifice her health and her future and her own dreams on the altar of my failing mind. That's different, I said weakly. How is it different? Before I could answer, I heard a crash from the living room, followed by Mama's frustrated voice saying, "Damn this stupid thing!" I rushed in to find her standing over the remnants of her favourite coffee mug, the one with the faded picture of Daddy holding a prize-winning steer from the county fair, now scattered in ceramic shards across the hardwood floor. "I was just trying to dust it," she said, her voice small and bewildered. "I don't know why my hands don't work right anymore." "It's okay, Mama. Accidents happen." I knelt to gather the pieces, and she knelt beside me, her fingers trembling as she tried to help. "I'm sorry, baby. I know that was your favourite too. It's just a mug." I lied, though seeing that familiar image broken into irreparable pieces felt like watching our whole family history crumble. "Karen's still there?" Mama asked, pointing at my phone. "Yes, ma'am." "Let me talk to her." I handed over the phone reluctantly, knowing that Mama's conversations with Karen had become increasingly difficult as her confusion deepened. "Hello, sweetheart," Mama said, her voice brightening the way it always did when she heard from her eldest daughter. "When are you coming to visit? It's been such a long time." I couldn't hear Karen's response, but I watched Mama's face change, cycling through confusion and hurt, and something that looked almost like betrayal. "A nursing home, Karen Elizabeth, I raised you better than that. You don't put family away like old furniture." The conversation continued for several more minutes, Mama's voice growing more agitated while I finished cleaning up the broken mug. By the time she handed the phone back to me, her cheeks were flushed and her hands were shaking with more than just the tremor that had developed over the past year. "She thinks I'm a burden," Mama said quietly. "She doesn't think that, Mama. She just worries about both of us." "Do you think I'm a burden?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with all the weight of love and obligation, and the terrible arithmetic of caregiving that never quite balanced. The honest answer was complicated. Yes, sometimes, in the small hours of the night, when I calculated how many months my savings would last, or when I cancelled plans with friends for the third time in a row, or when I realised I'd been wearing the same clothes for 2 days, because laundry had gotten buried under doctor's appointments and insurance calls. But looking at her face still beautiful at 78, despite the confusion that clouded her eyes, I could only give her the answer that mattered. "You could never be a burden, Mama. You're my mother." She reached for my hand, and we sat there on the living room floor surrounded by the detritus of our broken routine, holding on to each other in the wreckage of what used to be normal. The next few days passed in relative calm, which in our current reality meant Mama only had one middle-of-the-night episode and remembered to take her medications without too much coaxing. I'd started a notebook to track her good days and bad days, hoping to identify patterns that might help me predict and manage the worst moments. But the only pattern seemed to be the gradual but relentless progression toward worse. On Friday morning, I was sorting through the pile of medical bills that had accumulated on the kitchen counter when someone knocked at the front door. Through the peephole, I saw a woman about my age in a navy blue blazer holding a clipboard and wearing the kind of sympathetic smile that immediately put me on guard. "Ms. Patricia Morrison, I'm Janet Phillips from Adult Protective Services. I was hoping we could chat for a few minutes about your mother." My blood turned to ice water. "Is there a problem?" "May I come in? This is just a routine follow-up to some concerns that were brought to our attention." Routine follow-up. Concerns brought to our attention. The bureaucratic language couldn't disguise the fact that someone had reported me for neglect or abuse or inadequate care. The HOA complaint had been embarrassing, but this felt like an accusation that cut to the core of everything I'd been trying to do right. Of course, I said, stepping aside to let her in. Though I should mention my mother has dementia, so her account of things might not be entirely accurate. I understand. That's actually part of what I'd like to discuss with you. Mama appeared in the living room doorway, drawn by the sound of unfamiliar voices. She'd dressed herself that morning in a floral dress that was clean but wrinkled, and her hair was combed but not quite styled, the way she used to wear it before her hands started shaking too much to manage the rollers. Mama, this is Miss Phillips. She's here to visit with us for a few minutes. How lovely. Would you like some coffee? I just put a fresh pot on. Mama hadn't made coffee in months. I disconnected the coffee maker after she'd forgotten it was on and nearly burned down the kitchen, but her hostess instincts remained intact, even when everything else was falling apart. That's very kind of you, Mrs. Morrison, but I'm fine. How are you feeling today? Oh, I'm doing well, thank you. Patricia takes such good care of me. She's a wonderful daughter. Janet Phillips smiled and made a note on her clipboard. That's good to hear. Mrs. Morrison, do you feel safe in your home? Safe? Of course I feel safe. Why wouldn't I feel safe? Have you been getting enough to eat, taking your medications regularly? Mama looked confused by the questions glancing between me and Ms. Phillips, as if trying to understand why a stranger was asking about such private matters. I take my pills when Patricia gives them to me, she said finally. Sometimes I forget, but she remembers everything. More notes on the clipboard. I found myself cataloguing the room through this woman's eyes, noticing the dust on the end tables that I'd been meaning to clean for weeks, the stack of unfolded laundry on the couch, the faint smell of the adult diapers that Mama had started needing at night but refused to acknowledge. Miss Morrison, Janet Phillips turned her attention to me. Can you tell me about your mother's medical care? When was her last doctor's appointment? Tuesday. We see Dr. Patterson every 2 weeks for medication adjustments and general monitoring. She's also seeing a neurologist monthly, and we have a visiting nurse who comes by once a week to check her blood pressure and make sure she's not having any adverse reactions to the new medications. And you're managing her care full-time? Yes. Do you have any support other family members, professional caregivers, respite care? The question highlighted the isolation I'd been trying not to acknowledge. My sister lives in Atlanta. She visits when she can, and we have friends from church who check in. But day to day it's just you, yes? Janet Phillips nodded, making more notes that I couldn't read upside down, but that felt like tiny judgments accumulating on that clipboard. Mrs. Morrison, she said, turning back to Mama, do you ever leave the house, go shopping, or visit friends? Oh, yes, all the time. Patricia takes me to the store and we go to church on Sundays when I'm feeling up to it, and sometimes we drive out to see where the old farm used to be. That last part wasn't exactly true. We'd driven past the farm exactly once since I'd moved in, and Mama had cried for an hour afterward, but I wasn't about to correct her in front of social services. That sounds nice. Do you have any friends you like to visit with? Mama's face clouded over. Well, most of my friends have passed on or moved away, but there's Mrs. Henderson next door, though. She doesn't seem to want to chat as much as she used to. I winced, thinking about the incident with the laundry line that had apparently been part of the HOA complaint. The interview continued for another 20 minutes, covering everything from Mama's sleeping patterns to my own health and stress levels. Janet Phillips was professional but thorough, and by the time she was packing up her clipboard, I felt like I'd been stripped bare and examined under a microscope. Is there anything else you need to know? I asked as I walked her to the door. Actually, yes. I'd like to schedule a follow-up visit for next week, and I'm going to recommend that you speak with a social worker about community resources that might be available to help support your situation here. What kind of resources? Adult daycare programs, respite care services, home health aides. There are options that might allow you to continue caring for your mother while also giving you some breathing room. After she left, I sat on the front porch steps and called Karen, needing to hear a familiar voice, even if I knew she was going to say, "I told you so," in about 15 different ways. Someone reported us to social services, I said without preamble when she answered. "Oh, Patty, are you okay? Is Mom okay?" "We're fine." The caseworker seemed satisfied that Mama's not being neglected or abused. But Karen, this is getting serious. The HOA is making noises about violations, the neighbours are filing complaints, and now I've got the county breathing down my neck about whether I'm capable of providing adequate care. Maybe this is a sign that it's time to seriously consider alternatives. You mean the nursing home? I mean professional care in a setting that's designed for people with dementia. Patty, nobody's questioning that you love her or that you're doing your best. But sometimes our best isn't the same thing as what's best for the person we're trying to help. That night, I lay in bed listening to Mama move around the house, her restless energy keeping both of us awake. Around 2 in the morning, I heard the front door open and knew she was headed for another one of her nocturnal walks. I threw on a robe and followed her outside, finding her standing in the middle of the street in her nightgown, looking up at the sky. "The stars are different," she said when I reached her. "They've moved all the constellations around." "The stars are the same, Mama. It's just the season changing." "No, that's not right. The Big Dipper should be over there where that other bright star is now. Someone's rearranged them." I took her arm gently and guided her back toward the house, but she resisted digging her heels into the asphalt. "I don't want to go back in there," she said. "That house doesn't feel like mine anymore. Nothing feels like mine anymore." "What do you mean?" The woman who lives there, she looks like me, but she's not me. She can't remember things that happened yesterday, but she remembers every detail of things that happened 50 years ago. She puts her clothes on backwards and tries to cook with soap instead of butter and asks the same questions over and over until even the people who love her get tired of answering. The clarity of her self-awareness was devastating. In that moment, standing in the street under stars that had indeed shifted with the changing season, I realized that somewhere inside the confusion and the failing memories, my real mother was still there, trapped and aware of her own diminishment. "You're still you, Mama. Disease doesn't change who you are at your core." Doesn't it? When I can't remember your middle name or what year Daddy died or how to make the cornbread recipe my own mother taught me, what's left that's still me. I didn't have an answer for that, so I just stood there with her in the middle of Maple Street, both of us, in our nightclothes holding on to each other, while the world shifted around us in ways too big and relentless to fight. The following week brought the social worker Janet Phillips had recommended a kind woman named Maria Santos, who arrived with folders full of information about day programs and respite care, and something called a dementia cafe, where caregivers could bring their loved ones for supervised socialization. "The goal isn't to take over your mother's care," she explained as we sat at the kitchen table while Mama napped in her recliner. "It's to create a support network that allows you to continue caring for her in her own home for as long as possible." "How long is that usually?" "It depends on so many factors. The progression of the disease, the caregiver's health and stamina, the available family support, financial resources. Some families manage for years. Others find that circumstances change more quickly than they expected. And when it's not possible anymore, then we help families transition to other arrangements with dignity and love intact." The programs she described sounded wonderful. In theory, professional caregivers who could give me a few hours of respite each week. Activities designed specifically for people with dementia support groups, for family members navigating the same impossible terrain. But they also came with waiting lists and co-pays, and the underlying assumption that this was all just a temporary solution while we waited for the inevitable. "There's one more thing I wanted to discuss," Maria said as she gathered up her folders. "I spoke with Janet Phillips about the complaints from your homeowners association. There are legal protections for people with disabilities, and dementia is considered a disability under the Fair Housing Act, but those protections work best when families are proactive about addressing legitimate safety concerns." "What kind of safety concerns?" "Wandering primarily. Your mother's nighttime walks, her confusion about which house is hers, the incident with trying to hang laundry in your neighbour's yard. These behaviours aren't her fault, but they do create liability issues for the association and potential safety risks for her." We talked about alarm systems and door locks and GPS tracking devices that could be worn like jewelry. The conversation felt like planning a benevolent prison designed to keep Mama safe while making her life smaller and smaller until the walls of protection became indistinguishable from the walls of a cell. That evening, as I was helping Mama get ready for bed, she looked at me in the bathroom mirror and said, "You look tired, sweetheart. Are you getting enough sleep?" "I'm fine, Mama. You know when you were little and you couldn't sleep, I used to sit by your bed and sing until you drifted off. Would you like me to sing to you tonight?" The offer was so tender and so completely reversed from our current roles that I almost started crying right there in the bathroom. Instead, I smiled and said, "That sounds lovely." She sang Amazing Grace in a voice that wavered but still carried the melody true. And for those few minutes, she was completely herself again. The mother who had bandaged my scraped knees and helped me practice piano and stayed up all night when I had the flu giving instead of always needing to receive. The next morning brought another call from Karen, this one different in tone from her usual mixture of worry and gentle pressure. "I've been doing some research," she said, "about Millfield Manor. Did you know they have a program where families can essentially buy into the community? You put down a deposit that guarantees Mum a spot when she needs it, but she doesn't have to move in right away. It's like insurance." "How much of a deposit?" "That's the thing. It's substantial. But Patty, if we sell Mum's house, we'd have enough to cover it and still have money left over for ongoing care costs." Sell Mama's house. The words hit me like a physical blow. This house where she'd lived for 43 years, where she'd raised her children and nursed her husband through his final illness, and tended a garden that was still producing tomatoes in October. The house that was her last tangible connection to the life she'd built and the woman she used to be. She'd never agree to that. She might not have to agree. I've been reading about guardianship and conservatorship options. If her dementia progresses to the point where she's not capable of making sound financial decisions. Karen, no. Hear me out. I'm not talking about taking over her life. I'm talking about protecting her assets so they can be used for her care instead of being frittered away on property taxes and maintenance for a house she might not be able to live in much longer. This is her home. This is a building, Patty. Her home is wherever the people who love her are taking care of her. That afternoon, I found myself standing in Mama's backyard, looking at the garden she'd planted every spring for 4 decades. The tomato plants were still heavy with fruit, and her flower beds were a riot of late-season blooms that she'd somehow managed to tend even as everything else in her life became unmanageable. How could I explain to Karen that selling this house wouldn't just be selling a building, it would be selling the last piece of the woman our mother used to be? My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Janet Phillips from APS. Can you call me at your earliest convenience? Need to discuss some developments in your case." The word case made my stomach drop. We weren't a family dealing with a difficult situation anymore. We were a case, a file number, a problem to be managed by people who meant well, but didn't know that Mama still hummed while she folded laundry, or that she remembered every word to every hymn we'd sung in church for the past 50 years. I called Janet back from the front porch watching Mrs. Kowalski tend her own garden with the kind of easy competence that I remembered Mama having just a year ago. "Patricia, thank you for calling back so quickly. I wanted to give you a heads up that we've received another complaint from your homeowners association. This time it's about a health and safety violation." "What kind of violation?" "Apparently your mother was found in the community playground yesterday afternoon trying to push a child on the swing. The child's mother was understandably concerned." I closed my eyes trying to picture the scene. Mama had always loved children, had been the grandmother who remembered every birthday and never missed a school play. In her confused mind, seeing a child who needed help would have been as natural as breathing. Was anyone hurt? No, thankfully, but Patricia, I have to be honest with you, these incidents are escalating in frequency and severity. The association is within their rights to pursue legal action if they feel that your mother poses a safety risk to the community. What kind of legal action? Eviction proceedings, potentially. I know that sounds harsh, but homeowners associations have broad powers when it comes to enforcing community standards and safety regulations. After I hung up, I sat on the porch steps and let the full weight of our situation settle over me like a lead blanket. The complaints weren't going to stop. Mama's condition wasn't going to improve. My savings account was draining steadily. My own health was suffering from chronic sleep deprivation and stress, and now I was facing the possibility of losing the house anyway, not through a careful planned sale, but through legal action that would leave us with nothing. That evening, I called a family meeting, or as much of a family meeting as you can have, when one participant keeps forgetting why everyone is gathered around the kitchen table and the other is attending via video call from 4 states away. "Mama, we need to talk about some changes," I began. "What kind of changes?" She looked suspicious the way she always did when conversations turned serious. "Some people who want to help us have suggested that you might be happier in a place where there are other people your age to talk to, and activities designed specifically for folks dealing with memory problems." "You mean an old folks' home?" Karen's face on my laptop screen winced. "Not an old folks' home, Mum, a community, with beautiful gardens and activity rooms and people trained to help with medical needs. I have a beautiful garden right here, and this is my home. I know it is, Mama, but taking care of this house is getting to be too much for both of us. The yard work, the repairs, the property taxes. I don't want to be a burden." Her voice was small and defeated. "If you need me to go away so you can have your life back, just say so." "This isn't about me having my life back. This is about both of us being safe and healthy and having the support we need." "No, it's not." She stood up from the table, more agitated than I'd seen her in weeks. "It's about you giving up on me. It's about deciding that I'm too much trouble to keep around." "Mama, that's not—" "Don't lie to me, Patricia Ann. I may be confused about some things, but I'm not stupid. You think I don't see how tired you are. You think I don't know that you cry in the shower sometimes because you think I can't hear you." The accusation hung in the air between us, terrible in its accuracy. I had been crying in the shower, thinking the sound of the water would muffle my sobs. I had been tired, bone-deep, exhausted, in a way that sleep couldn't fix. But I hadn't realized that my grief was visible to her, adding another layer of burden to her already overwhelming confusion. "Taking care of you isn't a burden, Mama, it's a privilege. A privilege that's destroying your health and your finances and your future." This from Karen, her voice coming through the laptop speakers with digital precision. "Mom, nobody wants to send you away. We want to find a solution that works for everyone." "I want to stay in my house," Mama said, her voice rising. "I want to die in my house like your daddy did, surrounded by the things we built together and the people who love me. You want to stay in your house and I want to take care of you," I said. "But Mama, what if those two things can't both be true anymore?" She looked at me for a long moment, and I could see her struggling to hold on to the thread of the conversation as it threatened to slip away into the fog that claimed more and more of her thoughts each day. "Then I guess we're both going to be disappointed," she said finally. That night after Mama had gone to bed and Karen had signed off with promises to drive up the following weekend to tour facilities, I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and tried to make a list of our options. The page stayed blank for a long time, not because there weren't choices to be made, but because every choice felt like a betrayal of something I'd promised either to Mama or to myself, or to some idealized version of daughterhood that existed only in my imagination. Finally, I wrote down 3 words. What would Daddy want? Saja Tayase. The answer came to me immediately in his voice, as clear as if he were sitting across the table from me. He'd want whatever keeps both his girls safe and happy. But safety and happiness felt mutually exclusive now. Keeping Mama safe meant restricting her freedom and eventually moving her to a place she didn't want to be. Keeping her happy meant allowing her to stay in an environment that was becoming increasingly dangerous for both of us. The next morning brought a letter from the Homeowners Association delivered by certified mail and requiring my signature. The formal language couldn't disguise the ultimatum addressed the ongoing violations within 30 days or face eviction proceedings. I was still staring at the letter when Mrs. Kowalski knocked on the door holding a casserole dish and wearing the kind of expression that suggested she was the bearer of either very good news or very bad news. "I brought you some of that tuna noodle casserole your mother always liked," she said, though we both knew this was just the socially acceptable excuse for a conversation that was going to be much more serious than pasta and canned fish. "Thank you, that's very thoughtful." "Patricia, I need to tell you something, and I hope you'll understand that I'm only telling you because I care about both of you." My heart sank. "What is it?" "There's going to be an emergency board meeting tomorrow night about your situation. Some of the newer residents are pushing for immediate action, saying that your mother's condition is affecting property values and community safety." Property values? I know, it's ridiculous, but there are people in this neighborhood who see everything through the lens of their investment portfolio. They're worried that having someone with dementia wandering around will somehow make their houses worth less. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. We weren't talking about a nuisance neighbor who played music too loud or left garbage cans out too long. We were talking about a woman who had lived in this community longer than most of these people had been homeowners whose condition was a medical issue rather than a character flaw. What can I do? You can attend the meeting. You can speak on your own behalf. And Patricia, you might want to bring some support with you. This isn't going to be pleasant. That evening, I called our pastor, Reverend Williams, who had known our family since before I was born and had officiated at Daddy's funeral 12 years ago. "Of course I'll be there," he said when I explained the situation, "and I'll make some calls. There are other people in this community who remember when neighbors took care of each other instead of treating each other like potential lawsuits." The next day passed in a blur of preparation. I gathered medical records and documentation of Mama's care letters from her doctors, confirming that she was receiving appropriate treatment, and character references from people who had known our family for decades. It felt like preparing for a trial where the crime was growing old and sick in your own home. Karen drove up that afternoon, arriving with her lawyer husband and a briefcase full of research about elder care options and legal protections for people with disabilities. "Whatever happens at this meeting," she said as we sat in the living room while Mama napped, "we're going to present a united front. We're not going to let these people bully us into making a decision before we're ready. And if they vote to evict, then we'll fight it. The Fair Housing Act provides protections for people with disabilities and dementia qualifies. They can't just kick her out because she's sick. But they can make our lives miserable enough that staying becomes impossible. Maybe, but let's not surrender before the battle even starts." The community centre meeting room was packed that night, filled with neighbours I recognised and several I didn't. Mrs. Kowalski had kept her word about making calls. I spotted at least a dozen friendly faces scattered throughout the crowd, people who had shared potluck dinners and holiday celebrations with our family over the years. The board president, a man named Richard Stevens, who had moved into the neighbourhood 6 months ago, called the meeting to order with the kind of officious precision that suggested he'd been waiting his whole life for an opportunity to wield a gavel. "We're here tonight to address ongoing violations of community standards related to property at 427 Maple Street." He began reading from a prepared statement. "The board has received multiple complaints regarding noise disturbances, property maintenance issues, and safety concerns related to the behaviour of one of the residents. The resident has a name," called out Mrs. Henderson from the third row. "Dorothy Morrison has been part of this community longer than most of us have lived here." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, but Stevens continued reading his statement as if there had been no interruption. "The association has a responsibility to maintain property values and ensure the safety and peaceful enjoyment of all residents. When one homeowner's situation begins to negatively impact the community as a whole, action must be taken." What kind of action? This from Reverend Williams, who had positioned himself in the front row where his clerical collar would be visible to the entire room. The board is prepared to offer the Morrison family 60 days to relocate voluntarily. If they choose not to accept this generous timeline, we will proceed with formal eviction proceedings based on violations of the community standards outlined in the Homeowners Association bylaws. The word generous made my blood boil. 60 days to uproot a woman with dementia from the only home she had left to find appropriate care in a system with waiting lists and limited options to liquidate a lifetime of possessions and memories. I stood up, my legs shaky but my voice steady. I'd like to respond to these allegations. You'll have your turn to speak, Ms. Morrison, but first we need to hear from the complainants. For the next 30 minutes, I listened to neighbours I'd known for years catalogue my mother's symptoms as if they were criminal offences. The midnight walks, the confused conversations, the incident with the laundry line, the playground encounter, each story told with the kind of clinical detachment that stripped away any hint of compassion or understanding. She tried to get into my car last week, said someone from the back of the room, just opened the door and got in like it belonged to her. What if I hadn't seen her? What if she'd somehow managed to start it and driven off? My children are afraid to play outside, said another voice. They don't understand why the lady next door talks to people who aren't there. When it was finally my turn to speak, I walked to the front of the room and looked out at faces that ranged from sympathetic to hostile to carefully neutral. My mother has Alzheimer's disease, I began. It's a medical condition, not a character flaw. She didn't choose to develop dementia any more than someone chooses to develop cancer or diabetes. But cancer patients don't wander around the neighborhood disturbing other people, called out someone I didn't recognize. You're right, I said. Cancer patients get sympathy and casseroles and offers of help. Dementia patients get complained about and treated like public nuisances. I talked about Mama's 43 years in this house, about the garden she still tended, and the church she still attended, and the granddaughter she was still trying to save money to help with college. I talked about the professional care she was receiving, and the safety measures we had implemented, and the support network we were building. I'm not asking you to ignore legitimate safety concerns, I concluded. I'm asking you to work with us to address them in a way that allows my mother to live out her final years with dignity in the home she loves. When I finished, Reverend Williams stood up and asked if he could share a few thoughts. I've known the Morrison family for 35 years, he said. I watched Dorothy raise her girls, support her husband through his final illness, and contribute to this community in countless ways. She organized food drives during the recession, visited sick neighbors, and never missed a church fundraiser. Now she's the one who needs support, and we're talking about evicting her because her illness inconveniences us. He paused, letting his words sink in. I want to read you something from the book of Leviticus. You shall stand up before the grey head and honor the face of an old man, and you shall fear your God. That doesn't mean honor the old people who are still convenient to have around. It means honor all of them, especially the ones who need our help the most. The room was quiet when he sat down, but I could feel the mood shifting. The righteous anger that had filled the air when the meeting started was giving way to something more complex and uncomfortable. Karen stood up next, introducing herself as Mama's daughter and a legal advocate with experience in elder care issues. I want to make sure everyone understands the legal implications of what's being proposed here, she said. The Fair Housing Act provides specific protections for people with disabilities, and dementia is covered under that law. Any attempt to evict someone based on the symptoms of their medical condition could result in federal civil rights violations. Are you threatening to sue us? Asked Richard Stevens. I'm informing you of the law. But more than that, I'm asking you to consider what kind of community you want to live in. Do you want to be the neighborhood that takes care of its own, or the one that discards people when they become inconvenient? The debate continued for another hour, with voices on both sides growing increasingly passionate. But gradually a consensus began to emerge, not unanimity, but a majority willing to give us more time to work out a solution that addressed the safety concerns without forcing an immediate eviction. We'll table the eviction proceedings for 90 days, Stevens announced finally. But the Morrison family needs to provide a detailed plan for addressing the ongoing issues with regular progress reports to the board. It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't a defeat either. It was time, precious limited time, to figure out how to honour both Mama's need to stay home and everyone else's need to feel safe in their community. After the meeting, as neighbours filtered out into the parking lot, Mrs. Henderson approached me with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry about the laundry incident," she said. "I should have just walked over and helped her bring it inside instead of calling it in as a violation. You don't have anything to apologise for." I told her, though, part of me wondered how different things might have been if more people had chosen conversation over complaint. The drive home was quiet, all three of us lost in our own thoughts about what had just transpired. Mama had stayed home during the meeting, watched over by a teenage neighbour who was saving money for college. But I knew she would sense the tension and want to know what had happened. "How do we explain this to her?" I asked Karen as we pulled into the driveway. "Carefully, honestly, without making her feel like she's the problem." But when we walked into the house, we found Mama sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and a photo album open in front of her. "How did the meeting go?" she asked, as if she'd been waiting up for news about a school board election rather than a discussion about her future. "It went well," I said. "We have some time to work things out." "Good. I was looking through these old pictures while you were gone, and I found something I wanted to show you." She turned the album toward us, pointing to a black and white photograph from the early 1960s. It showed a much younger version of herself standing in front of this very house holding a baby that I realized must be Karen. "That was the day we brought you home from the hospital," she told Karen. "Your daddy was so proud he took about 50 pictures, but this was the only one that came out clear." Karen leaned over to look more closely at the photo, and I saw her expression soften in a way I hadn't seen since she'd started pushing for institutional care. "You look so young," Karen said. "I was terrified," Mama admitted. 22 years old with a brand new baby and a husband who works 60 hours a week and no idea how to be a mother. But we figured it out, didn't we?" "You did more than figure it out, Mama. You were wonderful. I made plenty of mistakes, but I tried to give you girls a home where you felt safe and loved and valued for who you were, not what other people thought you should be." The words hung in the air between us, a gentle reminder of what we were really fighting to preserve. Not just a house or a neighborhood or even a way of life, but the values that had shaped our family for generations. Over the next few weeks, we worked to implement the safety plan the Homeowners Association had required. A GPS tracking bracelet that looked like jewelry, motion sensors on all the exterior doors that would alert me if Mama tried to leave the house at night. Scheduled activities at the senior centre 3 days a week, providing both socialisation for her and respite for me. The changes weren't perfect. Mama resented the tracking device and sometimes refused to wear it, and the day programme required a 20-minute drive each way that ate into my already limited time for household tasks and errands. But they were working. The middle of the night wandering decreased dramatically. Her mood improved with regular social interaction, and the complaints from neighbours stopped coming. Maria Santos, the social worker, introduced us to a home health aide named Rosa, who came by twice a week to help with personal care and light housekeeping. Mama was resistant at first, insisting that she didn't need help and that having a stranger in the house made her nervous, but Rosa won her over with patience and stories about her own grandmother who had lived with Rosa's family during her final years. "It's not about needing help," Rosa explained to Mama during one of her visits. "It's about having company. My grandmother used to say that the best part of getting old was having people around who cared enough to listen to your stories." "I do have a lot of stories," Mama admitted. "Then I'm the perfect person to help you because I love stories." The transformation was gradual but remarkable. Having Rosa there twice a week gave me time to run errands, catch up on bills, and occasionally meet a friend for coffee without feeling guilty about leaving Mama alone. It also gave Mama someone new to talk to, someone who didn't know all her stories by heart and could listen with fresh ears to tales of her childhood and early marriage. But even with all the support systems in place, I could see the disease continuing its relentless progression. Mama's good days were still good, but they were becoming less frequent and shorter in duration. Her confusion was deepening, and she was starting to have trouble recognizing familiar faces, including mine sometimes. One evening in late November, as I was helping her get ready for bed, she looked at me in the bathroom mirror and asked, "Are you my daughter or my sister? You look so familiar, but I can't quite place you." "I'm your daughter Mama, Patricia Patty." "Patricia," she repeated as if testing the name on her tongue. "Yes, that sounds right. You're a good daughter, Patricia, very patient with old ladies who forget things." "You're not just any old lady, you're my mama." Am I well then? I must have done something right to raise such a wonderful girl. These moments of disconnection were becoming more frequent, and each one felt like a small death, the gradual erasure of the relationship that had defined so much of my life. But there were still flashes of the woman she had always been, her sense of humor, her kindness, her fierce love for her family. In December, Karen came up for a longer visit, staying for a full week instead of her usual weekend trips. On her third night there, as we were sitting in the living room after Mama had gone to bed, she brought up the subject we'd both been avoiding. "I think it's time," she said quietly. "Time for what?" "Oh, time to seriously consider the next step. Patty, look at yourself. You've lost weight, you never smile anymore, and I heard you on the phone with the insurance company yesterday, yelling at that poor customer service representative like it was her personal fault that they denied the claim for Mum's medications." "I wasn't yelling." "You were definitely yelling, and that's not like you. You're the one who always keeps her cool, who finds a way to make things work. But this situation is changing you, and not in good ways." I wanted to argue with her, but I couldn't. The stress was taking a toll on my physical and mental health in ways I'd been trying to ignore. My blood pressure was elevated. I'd developed a persistent tension headache that seemed immune to over-the-counter painkillers. And yes, I'd been short-tempered with bureaucrats and clerks and anyone else who seemed to be standing between Mama and the care she needed. "The waiting list at Millfield Manor came through," Karen continued. "They have an opening in their memory care unit starting January 1st. That's 3 weeks away. I know it's soon, but Patty openings in quality facilities don't come along often. If we pass this up, it could be months before another opportunity comes along." We talked until nearly midnight, weighing all the same factors we'd been debating for months. Mama's need for stability versus the reality of her declining condition. My commitment to caring for her at home versus my own physical and emotional limitations. The financial burden of professional care versus the financial impossibility of continuing our current arrangement indefinitely. "Let's visit the place," I said finally. "Together, all three of us. If Mama hates it, if it feels wrong, then we'll know it's not the right choice. And if it feels right, then we'll have a very difficult conversation about what comes next." Millfield Manor was nothing like the institutional nursing homes I'd imagined. The memory care unit was designed to look like a small neighborhood with residence rooms opening onto a central courtyard filled with raised garden beds and walking paths. The staff wore regular clothes instead of medical uniforms, and the whole place hummed with activity, people painting in the art room, singing in the music therapy session, tending plants in the greenhouse. Our tour guide was the director of the memory care program, a woman named Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who had worked in geriatric care for 15 years. "We design our programs around the understanding that people with dementia are still people," she explained as we walked through the facility. "They have preferences and personalities and histories that matter. Our job isn't to manage their disease, it's to help them live as fully as possible within the reality of their condition." Mama was unusually quiet during the tour, but she didn't seem distressed or resistant the way I'd feared she might be. She stopped to chat with several residents we encountered, falling easily into conversations about the weather and the upcoming Christmas decorations. "The gardens are lovely," she told Dr. Walsh. "I've always enjoyed gardening. Do residents help with the planting?" "Absolutely. We have gardening therapy sessions twice a week, and many of our residents maintain their own small plots. There's something very grounding about working with soil and watching things grow. Yes, there is, Mama agreed. Even when your mind gets confused, your hands remember how to tend growing things. As we concluded the tour in Dr. Walsh's office, she addressed the question I'd been afraid to ask. How do families usually handle the transition? I mean, how do you help someone adjust to such a big change when they have dementia? Very carefully and with a lot of support for everyone involved, we've found that gradual transitions work best. Starting with day visits, then overnight stays, gradually increasing until the person feels comfortable with this as their new environment. And we encourage family members to be as involved as they want to be. This doesn't have to feel like abandonment. It can feel like expanding the care team. On the drive home, Mama was quiet for a long time before finally speaking up from the back seat. "That place seems nice," she said. "The people were friendly and those gardens were beautiful, but it's not home." "No, it's not home," I agreed. "Would you visit me if I had to live there?" The question broke my heart because it suggested she understood more about our situation than she usually let on. "Mama, I would visit you every single day if that's what you wanted, but you're not going anywhere you don't want to go. What if staying home isn't what's best for you? What if taking care of me is ruining your life?" Karen reached back and took Mama's hand. "Mom taking care of you isn't ruining anyone's life, but there might come a time when you need more help than we can provide at home. Like when I forget who you are. Maybe, or when your physical needs become more than we can safely manage, or when the stress starts making us sick." "Are you sick, Patricia?" I glanced at her in the rearview mirror, seeing my own mother, but also seeing a stranger, someone whose mind was slowly being erased by a disease neither of us had chosen and neither of us could fight. "I'm tired, Mama, really, really tired." "Then maybe it's time for me to go somewhere where other people can help take care of me so you can rest." That night, after Mama had gone to bed, Karen and I sat at the kitchen table with the admission paperwork from Millfield Manor spread out between us like a map to a country neither of us wanted to visit. "She's giving us permission," Karen said. "Did you hear that she's telling us it's okay to let other people help?" I heard her. "But Karen, what if we're wrong? What if this is just a bad period and she gets better? What if she's happier at home even if it's harder for us? And what if she's not? What if the stress of trying to keep her here ends up making everything worse for everyone?" We filled out the paperwork that night, but I couldn't bring myself to mail it. Instead, it sat on my dresser for 3 days, a stack of forms that represented either the practical solution to an impossible situation or the ultimate betrayal of everything I'd promised about keeping Mama safe at home. The decision was made for me on a Tuesday evening in mid-December. I had been out picking up prescriptions and groceries gone for less than 2 hours while Rosa stayed with Mama. When I returned, I found fire trucks in our driveway and neighbours gathered on the sidewalk with the kind of expressions that suggested something terrible had just been narrowly avoided. Mama was sitting on the front porch with a blanket around her shoulders talking to a paramedic who was checking her vital signs. Rosa was pacing back and forth on the lawn, clearly shaken but unhurt. "What happened?" I asked, rushing toward the porch. "She tried to cook dinner," Rosa explained, "but she put a dish towel on the stove burner instead of the pot. When the smoke alarm went off, she got confused and couldn't remember how to turn off the stove. I was in the bathroom and didn't hear the alarm right away. The fire department had responded to the smoke alarm, which was connected to a monitoring service we'd installed as part of the safety plan. There was no actual fire, but there could have been. If Rosa hadn't been there, if the dish towel had caught flame, instead of just smouldering if Mama had panicked and tried to fight the fire herself." "Is she okay?" I asked the paramedic. "Physically she's fine, but she's pretty shaken up. She keeps asking if she's in trouble." I knelt down beside Mama's chair and took her hands, which were trembling slightly. "You're not in trouble, sweetheart. Accidents happen. I just wanted to make you dinner," she said, her voice small and lost. "I used to be such a good cook. Your daddy always said I made the best pot roast in 3 counties. You did make the best pot roast, you still do. No, I don't. I can't remember which knob turns on which burner. I can't remember if the chicken needs to cook for 30 minutes or 3 hours. I can't remember anything anymore. That night, after the fire trucks had left and Rosa had gone home and the kitchen had been ventilated and cleaned, I called Karen. We need to move forward with Millfield, I said without preamble. What happened? I told her about the afternoon's events, about the smoke and the confusion, and the look of absolute terror in Mama's eyes when she realized she couldn't remember something as basic as how to use her own stove. She could have been killed, I said, or she could have burned down the house with herself and Rosa inside. I can't live with that risk anymore. Are you sure? Because once we start this process, it's going to be very hard to reverse course. I'm sure, not because I want to be, but because I have to be. We scheduled Mama's admission for January 3rd, giving us time to get through the holidays and arrange for a gradual transition. Dr. Walsh recommended that Mama spend a few afternoons at the facility in December participating in activities and getting used to the staff and routines. Telling Mama about the decision was one of the hardest conversations I'd ever had. I waited until after her morning medications had taken effect, and she was having one of her clearer days. Mama, we need to talk about your safety, I began. Because of the stove incident, that's part of it, but it's bigger than just one accident. Your needs are changing, and I want to make sure you're getting the best possible care. You mean I need to go live at that nice place with the gardens? Would that be okay with you? She was quiet for a long time, staring out the kitchen window at her own garden, now dormant under a light coating of December frost. Will you take some of my plants with me? Maybe some cuttings from the rose bush your daddy planted for our anniversary. Of course, we'll make sure you have a little piece of this garden wherever you go. And will you still visit even when I forget who you are? Especially when you forget who I am. That's when you'll need me most. The holidays passed in a blur of preparations and bittersweet moments. Christmas morning was particularly poignant, with Mama opening gifts she would forget receiving by afternoon, but enjoying the moment with the pure delight of a child. Karen stayed through New Year's helping me sort through 43 years of accumulated possessions and memories. We decided to keep the house at least initially. The rental income would help cover Mama's care costs, and having it as a safety net felt important in case the transition to Millfield didn't work out as planned. But packing up Mama's personal belongings felt like dismantling a life one sock drawer at a time. What do we do with all these photographs? Karen asked, holding up albums filled with pictures of people Mama could no longer identify. We take them with us. Even if she doesn't remember the names or faces, maybe they'll still bring her comfort. The morning of January 3rd dawned bright and cold, with the kind of crystalline winter light that made everything look sharp-edged and fragile. I helped Mama dress in her favourite blue sweater and the pearl earrings Daddy had given her for their silver wedding anniversary. Do I look nice? She asked, checking her reflection in the bedroom mirror. You look beautiful, Mama. Good. I want to make a good impression on my new neighbours. The move itself went more smoothly than I'd expected. Mama seemed to understand that this was a significant change, but she wasn't resistant or upset the way I'd feared she might be. If anything, she seemed relieved to hand over some of the burden of daily decision-making to other people. Her room at Millfield was bright and cheerful, with large windows overlooking the central courtyard. We'd arranged the furniture to match her bedroom at home as closely as possible, and her favourite quilt was spread across the bed like a promise of continuity in the midst of upheaval. This is cosy, she said, settling into the armchair we'd brought from home. And look, I can see the garden from here. I stayed for several hours that first day eating lunch with her in the dining room and attending an afternoon music therapy session where she surprised everyone by remembering all the words to White Christmas. When it came time to leave, I braced myself for tears or accusations or pleas to come home. Instead, she hugged me and said, "Thank you for finding me such a nice place to live. You're a good daughter, Patricia." I love you, Mama. I love you too, sweetheart. Even when I can't remember your name, I'll always remember that someone loves me very much. The first few weeks were an adjustment for both of us. Mama had good days and difficult days, moments of clarity followed by periods of deep confusion. But gradually she began to establish routines and relationships in her new environment. She became particularly attached to a man named Harold, who reminded her of Daddy, and to a nurse named Beth, who had a gift for redirecting her attention when she became agitated. I visited every other day initially, then scaled back to twice a week as Mama became more settled. The guilt was enormous at first, not just for placing her in care, but for discovering that I was sleeping better and eating regular meals, and remembering what it felt like to have conversations about topics other than medications and doctor's appointments. "You look better," Rosa told me when she stopped by the house for coffee a few weeks after the move. "Less tired, more like yourself again. I feel guilty about feeling better. Why, your mother is safe and well cared for, and you're finally taking care of yourself too. That's not something to feel guilty about, that's something to be grateful for." Spring came early that year, and with it the return of energy and hope I hadn't realized I'd lost. I started going to a weekly support group for adult children of parents with dementia, where I learned that my experiences weren't unique and my feelings weren't wrong. I also started volunteering at the local literacy centre, using skills I'd developed during my years in the county clerk's office to help adults work toward their GEDs. Mama's condition continued to decline gradually, but she seemed genuinely content at Millfield. She'd made friends with several other residents, and her participation in the gardening therapy program had given her a sense of purpose and accomplishment. When the spring planting season arrived, she was the unofficial leader of the greenhouse committee, directing other residents in the care and transplanting of seedlings with the confident voice of someone who had spent decades coaxing life from soil. "She's thriving," Dr. Walsh told me during one of our monthly check-ins. "I know that might sound strange given her diagnosis, but she's engaged with her environment and her community in ways that are really remarkable." Does she ask about going home? Sometimes, but more often she talks about this as home now. She's proud of her room, proud of her garden plot, proud of the friendships she's formed here. On a warm afternoon in May, almost 6 months after the move, I found Mama in the facility's greenhouse, teaching a new resident how to transplant tomato seedlings. "You have to be gentle but firm," she was saying, her hands sure and steady as they worked in the soil. "Plants are tougher than they look, but they need to know you care about their welfare." She looked up when she saw me approaching, her face lighting up with recognition and pleasure. "Patricia, come see what we're growing. These tomatoes are going to be beautiful this summer." "They look wonderful, Mama. Harold says I have a green thumb, but I told him it's not about the thumb. It's about paying attention to what the plants need and providing it consistently." I sat with her in the greenhouse for over an hour that day, listening to her share gardening wisdom with other residents and watching her hands move with the muscle memory of decades spent nurturing growing things. In that moment, surrounded by the smell of rich soil and green growing plants, I understood that we had made the right choice, not the easy choice, but the right one. The decision to place a parent in professional care isn't a failure of love or commitment. It's a recognition that sometimes love means admitting when you've reached the limits of what you can provide alone. This is a dramatized story created for entertainment and inspiration, not medical, legal, or financial advice.